The stranger stumbled into Independence, California, on a Tuesday afternoon in July of 1882, looking more dead than alive, his clothes hanging off his frame like sails with no wind to fill them. Victoria Jean Harper watched him from the window of her small ranch house on the edge of town, her hands pausing over the bread dough she had been kneading. Something about the way he moved, each step deliberate as if it cost him everything he had, made her heart clench with recognition. She had seen hunger before, real hunger, the kind that hollowed a person out from the inside. He collapsed near the water trough by her barn, and Victoria did not hesitate. She wiped her hands on her apron and rushed outside, the July heat hitting her like a wall as she left the relative coolness of her kitchen. Up close, he looked even worse. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of months without proper nourishment. His dark hair was long and unkempt, and when she knelt beside him, she could count his ribs through his torn shirt. "Mister," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "Mister, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, and she found herself looking into the darkest brown eyes she had ever seen. Even half dead, there was something in them, some spark that had not been extinguished. He tried to speak, but his lips were cracked and bleeding. "Do not try to talk," Victoria said. "Can you stand? My house is right there. I can help you." He managed a slight nod, and with her help he got to his feet. He was tall, she realized, probably 6 feet or more, though he was so hunched over with weakness it was hard to tell. Together they made their way to the house, and she guided him to a chair at her kitchen table. He slumped into it, his head hanging low. Victoria moved quickly, her mind racing through what she knew about starvation. Her father had been a doctor before he died, and she had learned plenty from him. You could not just feed someone solid food after months of nothing. It had to be gentle, careful, or you could kill them just as surely as the hunger had almost done. She heated broth she had made that morning, the rich smell of beef and vegetables filling the kitchen. While it warmed, she brought him water, making him drink slowly, sip by sip. He tried to gulp it down, but she pulled the cup away. "Slowly," she insisted. "Your body needs to remember what to do with it." He nodded again, those dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. When the broth was ready, she ladled some into a bowl and sat down across from him. "What is your name?" she asked as she handed him a spoon. His hand shook as he took it. "Zachary," he managed, his voice barely more than a rasp. "Zachary Xander." "I am Victoria," she said. "Eat slowly, Zachary. I know you are hungry, but if you eat too fast, you will get sick." He nodded and brought a spoonful of broth to his lips. She watched as he closed his eyes, and something like bliss crossed his ravaged features. He ate slowly, as she had instructed, and she could see it took every ounce of his willpower not to devour the entire bowl in seconds. When he finished, she did not give him more, though she could see he wanted it. "In a few hours," she promised. "Your stomach needs time." "Thank you," he said, and his eyes filled with tears he was too weak to hide. "I thought I was going to die." Victoria felt her own throat tighten. "What happened to you?" Zachary was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. They were scarred and calloused, the hands of a working man. "Got caught in the mountains," he said finally. "Was prospecting up near the Nevada border. My partner, he took sick and died. By the time I buried him and tried to make it back, winter had set in early. Ate everything I had, then everything I could catch or find. When spring came, I was too weak to hunt properly. Been walking for weeks, trying to get back to civilization." "That is more than 100 miles, Victoria said, her heart aching at the thought of what he had endured. "Felt like 1,000, he admitted. "I kept thinking I would find a town, a ranch, something. But this country is bigger than it looks on a map." She knew that truth intimately. Independence was isolated, tucked into the Owens Valley with the Sierra Nevada rising to the west and the White Mountains to the east. It was beautiful but unforgiving country, and people died here all the time from exposure, from accidents, from simple bad luck. "You are safe now," she told him. "I will help you." Over the next few hours she gave him more broth, and later that evening some bread softened in milk. She could see the food was already making a difference. There was a bit more color in his face, a bit more life in his eyes. He sat at her table, watching her move around the kitchen as she prepared her own dinner, and she was acutely aware of his gaze. "Why are you alone out here?" he asked as she sat down to eat. Victoria considered how much to tell him. "My father died 2 years ago," she said finally. "He was the doctor here, left me this place and a bit of money. I have been managing on my own. No husband. Seems strange for a woman as pretty as you." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "There was someone once. He went off to fight in some range war down in New Mexico. Never came back. I am sorry." "It was a long time ago." She changed the subject. "What about you? Family waiting for you somewhere?" Zachary shook his head. "Parents died when I was young. Raised by my uncle, but we had a falling out when I was 18. I have been on my own since then. Drifting, mostly. Trying my luck at prospecting, cowboying, whatever work I could find." "How old are you now?" 26. He paused. "Feel about twice that after the last few months." Victoria smiled slightly. "You will feel better soon. It will take time, but the body is remarkably good at healing itself when given the chance." That night, she made up a bed for him in the small room off the kitchen that had once been her father's study. Zachary could barely keep his eyes open, exhaustion overwhelming him now that he was finally safe and fed. She helped him to the room, and he sank onto the bed with a groan of relief. "Thank you, Victoria," he said, his eyes already closing. "I will repay you somehow, I promise." She looked down at him, this stranger who had stumbled into her life looking half dead, and felt something shift in her chest. "Just get well," she said softly. "That is repayment enough." The next morning, she woke early as always and started breakfast. She made more broth and some soft scrambled eggs, knowing he could handle something a little more substantial now. When she checked on him, he was still sleeping, but his breathing was even and his color was better. She let him rest. He woke around mid-morning and came out to the kitchen, moving slowly but under his own power. In the daylight streaming through the windows, she could see him more clearly. Beneath the ravages of starvation, he had a strong face, with a straight nose and a firm jaw. His dark hair curled slightly at the ends, and when he smiled at her, tentative and grateful, she felt her heart skip. "How are you feeling?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. "Like maybe I will live," he said, and there was a hint of humor in his voice that had not been there before. She fed him eggs and more bread, and he ate slowly, savoring every bite. She could see him gaining strength with each meal, his body desperately soaking up the nourishment it had been denied for so long. Over the next days, a routine developed. Victoria cooked for him, carefully increasing the amount and richness of the food as his body adjusted. She made hearty stews, roasted chicken, fresh bread with butter, vegetables from her garden. She watched, fascinated and deeply moved as the color slowly returned to his face. The grayish pallor faded, replaced by healthy tan. His cheeks filled out and the sharp edges of his bones softened. His eyes grew brighter, more alert, more present. He insisted on helping with chores as soon as he was able, though at first all he could manage was sitting and shelling peas or peeling potatoes. Victoria found herself enjoying his company. He was quiet but not sullen, thoughtful but not brooding. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. "You laugh like music," he told her one afternoon as they sat on the porch, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "You are getting poetic," she teased. "That means you are definitely feeling better." As the weeks passed and July turned to August, Zachary grew stronger. He was able to help more around the ranch, mending fences, caring for her small herd of cattle, chopping wood. His body was filling out, muscle returning to his frame. Victoria tried not to stare, but she could not help noticing the way his shoulders had broadened, the way his arms had regained their strength. He was becoming a handsome man, and more than that, she was falling for the person beneath the appearance. They talked for hours, sitting on the porch in the evenings as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He told her about his wandering years, the places he had seen, the people he had met. She told him about growing up in Independence, about helping her father with his patients, about her dreams of maybe one day having a family of her own. "Why did you not marry?" he asked one evening. "After the other man died, I mean. Surely there were others interested." Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching the colors fade from the sky. "I suppose I was waiting for something," she said finally, "or someone. I did not want to settle just to avoid being alone." "I understand that," Zachary said softly. "I have been alone most of my life, but I always figured when I met the right person I would know." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Victoria felt her pulse quicken. "Zachary," she began, but he reached over and took her hand. "I know," he said. "Me too." They sat like that as darkness fell, hands clasped, not needing words. Victoria felt a sense of rightness settle over her, as if all the pieces of her life had suddenly clicked into place. The next weeks were a revelation. They grew closer, the attraction between them building with each passing day. Zachary kissed her for the first time one evening as they stood by the barn, the stars brilliant overhead. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise, and when they pulled apart, Victoria was breathless. "I love you," he said, the words simple and sincere. "I know it is fast, but I cannot help it. You saved my life, Victoria. You brought me back from the edge. But it is more than that. You are kind and strong and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "From almost the first moment I watched you eat that broth, and I knew you were someone special." They kissed again, deeper this time, passion igniting between them. But they were both conscious of propriety, of doing things right. Zachary pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Let me be your husband. Let me spend every day of my life showing you how grateful I am, how much I adore you." "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Independence, with half the town in attendance. Victoria wore a simple white dress she had made herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Zachary had bought a new suit with money he earned doing work around town, and he looked devastatingly handsome, his dark hair trimmed and his face full and healthy. As they said their vows, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Zachary had stumbled into her life half dead, and she had nursed him back to health. But in saving him, she had also saved herself from a life of loneliness, from endless days with no one to share them with. They had found each other against all odds, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was meant to be. The reception was held at her ranch, now their ranch, and the celebration went long into the night. There was music and dancing and more food than Victoria had cooked in months. Zachary held her close as they danced under the stars, and she felt happier than she had ever been. That night, alone in their bedroom, they came together with a passion that had been building for weeks. Zachary was gentle and reverent, treating her like she was precious beyond measure. Victoria had never felt so cherished, so loved. They explored each other with wonder and delight, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, she knew she had found her home. The next months were blissful. They worked the ranch together, building it into something more substantial. Zachary proved to be an excellent rancher, his years of varied work giving him skills in everything from animal husbandry to carpentry. He built a new barn, expanded the house, and fenced more land for grazing. Victoria continued to cook, now for two, and she took joy in watching her husband eat heartily, his body strong and healthy and far removed from the half-dead man who had collapsed by her water trough. They laughed together, loved together, built a life together. Independence had always been Victoria's home, but now it felt truly complete. She had a partner, someone who stood beside her, who supported her dreams even as he pursued his own. In the spring of 1883, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after dinner, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. His face lit up with such pure joy that tears sprang to her eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Our baby. Victoria, you have given me everything. A home, a future, a reason to live, and now this. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I am the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Victoria bloomed with it. Zachary was attentive and loving, doing everything he could to make her comfortable. He rubbed her feet when they swelled, brought her whatever food she craved, talked to her growing belly late at night, telling their child how much they were already loved. Their son was born on a cold November morning, arriving with a healthy wail that filled the house. Zachary cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny life they had created. Victoria cradled the baby to her chest, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. They named him Thomas, after Victoria's father, and he was perfect. Dark hair like his father, blue eyes like his mother, and a temperament that was mercifully even. Zachary was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed. Victoria watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love with him. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier but rich with meaning. The ranch prospered, their family grew, and independence continued to be their anchor. They made friends in town, became pillars of the small community. Victoria helped deliver babies and nurse the sick, using the skills her father had taught her. Zachary became known as a fair and honest man, someone you could rely on in a crisis. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a red-faced, squalling bundle they named Grace. She had Zachary's dark eyes and Victoria's determination, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from day one. Thomas, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. Victoria looked at her family, at the life they had built together, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. She thought about that July day when Zachary had stumbled into her yard, more ghost than man. She had fed him, watched the color return to his face, watched him come back to life. But he had given her just as much, maybe more. He had given her love, partnership, a family, a future full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas and Grace play in the yard. She was 4 now, her brother 6, and they were inseparable. "About the day we met," Victoria said, reaching for his hand. "About how close we came to never finding each other." Zachary squeezed her fingers. "I think about that sometimes too. If I had taken a different path, if you had not been home that day, if you had been afraid of a stranger and not helped me, so many things could have gone wrong." "But they did not," Victoria said softly. "We found each other. Against all the odds, we found each other." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Zachary said, pulling her close. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed, sweet and familiar, a kiss that spoke of years together and many more to come. The children's laughter rang out across the yard, and the sun set behind the mountains, and everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They added to the ranch, buying more land, increasing their herds. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father. Grace was spirited and bold with a laugh that could light up a room. In 1888, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel, and then in 1891, their youngest, a daughter named Elizabeth. The house was always full of noise and life and love. Victoria cooked enormous meals, feeding her growing family and any neighbors or travelers who happened by. She had a reputation for hospitality, for never turning anyone away. It was partly because she remembered that July day, remembered what it meant to help someone in desperate need. Zachary built furniture in the winter months, beautiful pieces that were sought after throughout the valley. He was patient and skilled, teaching Thomas the trade as the boy grew older. The two of them would spend hours in the workshop, the sound of saws and hammers a comfortable backdrop to daily life. Grace learned to ride almost before she could walk, and by the time she was 10, she could handle a horse better than most grown men. She had her father's courage and her mother's compassion, a combination that made her extraordinary. Samuel was quieter, more introspective, with a love for books that Victoria encouraged. She taught him to read early, and he devoured every book he could get his hands on. Elizabeth was still a baby, but already she showed signs of having her own strong personality. Independence grew slowly over the years, but it remained a small, tight-knit community. Victoria and Zachary were respected and beloved, known for their kindness and generosity. They hosted barn dances and holiday celebrations, opening their home to anyone who needed a place to belong. In 1895, when Thomas was 18, he announced his intention to marry a local girl named Sarah. Victoria remembered her own wedding, the joy and hope of that day, and she blessed her son and his bride with all her heart. Zachary built them a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, and they started their own life together, though they remained close to the family. Grace, at 16, showed no interest in marriage yet, much to the disappointment of several young men in town. She was too busy learning to manage the ranch, proving herself just as capable as any man. Victoria was proud of her daughter's independence, even as she worried slightly about her reckless streak. Samuel, at 13, announced he wanted to be a doctor like his grandfather. Victoria felt her heart swell with pride and immediately began teaching him everything she remembered from her father's lessons. He was a quick study, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Elizabeth, now 4, was the baby of the family and utterly spoiled by everyone. She followed Grace everywhere, trying to mimic her older sister's fearlessness. Through it all, Victoria and Zachary remained the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. Their love had only deepened over the years, weathering storms and celebrating triumphs together. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, hands clasped, watching the sun set behind the mountains. They still kissed like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the wonder of those early days. "You remember what you promised me?" Victoria asked one evening in 1896, their 14th anniversary approaching. "That first night when I gave you a bed to sleep in. Zachary smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I said I would repay you somehow." "You have," Victoria said softly, "1,000 times over. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more." "It is I who owe you everything," Zachary insisted, his voice serious now. "You saved my life, Victoria, not just by feeding me, though that too, but you gave me a reason to live. You gave me love and family and purpose. Before you, I was just drifting, waiting to die. You changed everything." "We saved each other," Victoria said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from loneliness, from despair. It gives us hope." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear the children, their voices a familiar symphony. Thomas and Sarah had joined them for dinner and were still there, Thomas and his father discussing plans for a new barn. Grace was teaching Elizabeth a song, their voices blending sweetly. Samuel was reading aloud from a medical text, asking Victoria questions between passages. This was life, Victoria thought. This beautiful, chaotic, perfect life. And it had all started with a starving stranger stumbling into her yard and her decision to help him. The turn of the century brought changes to independence and to the Xander family. The railroad finally reached the valley, making travel and trade easier. Thomas and Sarah had their first child, making Victoria and Zachary grandparents. Grace, now 21, finally fell in love with a rancher from the next valley over, a steady young man named Daniel who treated her like a queen. They married in the spring of 1900, and Victoria cried happy tears at the ceremony. Samuel left for medical school in San Francisco, his bags packed with books and his mother's advice. It was hard to see him go, but Victoria was so proud she thought her heart might burst. He promised to write often and visit when he could. Elizabeth, now 9, was growing into a lovely young girl with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She helped Victoria in the kitchen, learning to cook and manage a household. She was fascinated by her grandmother's stories of nursing the sick and helping with births, and Victoria wondered if she might follow in her brother's footsteps. Zachary was in his mid-40s now, his dark hair threaded with silver, but he was still strong and vital. The years of starvation had left no permanent damage, thanks to Victoria's careful nursing. He worked the ranch with the same dedication he always had, though now he had Thomas to help carry the load. Victoria was 43, and she felt every year of it in her bones, but she would not trade a single one. Her hair had some gray in it too, and there were lines on her face that had not been there when she was 24, but Zachary still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. "You are," he insisted one night as they lay in bed, his arms around her. "To me, you will always be that young woman who took pity on a starving stranger. You will always be the one who saved my life." "You were worth saving," Victoria murmured, already half asleep. "You have always been worth it." The years rolled on, each one a gift. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, births and weddings. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children, Grace and Daniel had 2, and Samuel eventually returned from medical school with a wife, a fellow doctor named Rachel. They set up practice in Independence, taking over the role Victoria's father had once filled. Elizabeth married at 22 to a teacher who had come to Independence to open a school. They had 4 children in quick succession, and the house was once again filled with the sounds of little ones. Victoria and Zachary grew older together, their love a constant through all the changes. They watched their family expand, their legacy secure in the generations they had raised. The ranch continued to prosper, now managed primarily by Thomas and his sons. though Zachary still insisted on helping with the work. In 1910, they celebrated their 28th anniversary with a party that included children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house they had built together was bursting with family, with love, with life. Victoria looked around at all the faces, seeing traces of herself and Zachary in each one, and felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy?" Zachary asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happier than I have any right to be," Victoria said, leaning back against him. "When I think about where we started, what we have built together, it is almost overwhelming." "We have been blessed," Zachary agreed. "Every single day with you has been a blessing." They danced that night, as they had at their wedding, moving slowly to music played by their grandchildren on violin and guitar. Victoria rested her head on Zachary's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought about that first bowl of broth, that first moment when she had watched the color start to return to his face. She had known, even then, that this man was going to be important to her. She had been right. He had become her everything. Her husband, her partner, her best friend, the father of her children, the love of her life. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness, a decision to help someone in need. As the years continued, they settled into the comfortable rhythms of old age. Zachary's hair turned fully white, and his body slowed down, though his mind remained sharp. Victoria's hands developed arthritis, making cooking more difficult, but she persisted, still finding joy in feeding her family. They still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had called home for so long. They told stories to their great-grandchildren, tales of the old days, of how Grandpa Zachary had arrived more dead than alive, and how Grandma Victoria had saved him. "It sounds like a fairy tale," one of the great-grandchildren said one evening, eyes wide with wonder. "It does not it?" Victoria agreed, smiling. "But it is all true, every word." "Tell us again about the first time you kissed," another child begged. Zachary laughed, the sound warm and rich despite his age. "It was under the stars, right over there by the barn. I had been working up the courage for days, but that night I just could not wait any longer. I took her hand and I told her I loved her, and then I kissed her. Best moment of my life up to that point." "And Grandma, what did you do?" "I kissed him back," Victoria said, her eyes sparkling, "because I loved him too. I had loved him for weeks by then, watching him get stronger, getting to know the wonderful man he was. When he finally kissed me, it felt like coming home." The children sighed happily, already imagining their own romantic futures. Victoria and Zachary shared a smile, remembering. In 1915, they celebrated their 33rd anniversary quietly, just the two of them. Their children had offered to throw a party, but they had declined, wanting this day to be private. They had dinner on the porch, just as they had so many times before, and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. 33 years, Victoria said softly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever." "Both," Zachary said, raising his glass in a toast. "Here is to 33 more." Victoria laughed, though they both knew that was unlikely at their age, but the sentiment was what mattered. They would love each other for as long as they had, whether that was 33 years or 33 days. As it happened, they had more time than they might have guessed. They celebrated their 40th anniversary in 1922, surrounded by so much family they could barely count everyone. 4 generations gathered at the ranch, all of them descended from Victoria and Zachary, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and kindness that had defined their lives. Victoria was 70 now, and Zachary was 72. They moved slowly, their bodies worn by decades of hard work and the inevitable march of time. But their minds were still clear, and their love was as strong as ever. "I never thought I would live this long," Zachary admitted one evening as they sat in their familiar spot on the porch. "After those 3 months in the mountains, after nearly starving to death, I thought I was on borrowed time." "You earned every year," Victoria said firmly. "You have lived a full, good life. You have been a wonderful husband and father and grandfather. You have nothing to regret." "My only regret is that I will not have forever with you," Zachary said, taking her hand. "But I will take what we have been given and be grateful for it." They sat in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The years had been kind to them in the ways that mattered. They had their health, their family, their home. They had each other. Victoria thought back to that July day in 1882 when a starving stranger had collapsed by her water trough. She had been 24 years old, lonely and uncertain about her future. She had cooked for him, watched the color return to his face and fallen in love. And that love had grown and deepened and expanded to encompass this whole beautiful life they had built. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would do it all exactly the same, as long as it meant I got to be with you." Zachary turned to her, his eyes still as dark and intense as they had been when he was a young man. "As would I," he said. "You are my miracle, Victoria. You always have been." They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and devotion. Around them, the ranch they had built together sprawled across the valley, home to multiple generations of their family. Inside the house, their great-grandchildren were probably getting ready for bed, listening to stories from their parents and grandparents. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the house or the material things they would leave behind, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the values they had instilled. Kindness, compassion, hard work, dedication, and above all, love. These were the things that would outlast them, passed down through the generations. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Victoria rested her head on Zachary's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her. They had been sitting like this for 40 years, and it still felt as right as it had that first evening when they had admitted their love for each other. "Thank you," Zachary said softly, "for that first bowl of broth, for taking a chance on a starving stranger, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you for stumbling into my yard," Victoria replied, smiling, "for being worth saving, for loving me back, for all of this." They sat together as night fell, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The sounds of family drifted out from the house, laughter and conversation, and the occasional cry of a baby. These were the sounds of life, of continuity, of love carried forward. Victoria closed her eyes, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she was a young woman alone on a ranch. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more. A partner who cherished her, children who honored her, grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried her values into the future. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. She had fed a starving man, watched the color return to his face and fallen in love. From that moment, everything else had flowed, like a river finding its course to the sea. The years continued their steady march, but Victoria and Zachary faced them together, as they always had. They grew frailer, their steps slower, but their love remained constant. They held each other through cold nights and hot days, through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow. Their family rallied around them, providing care and comfort as they aged. Thomas took over the full management of the ranch, though he still consulted his father on every major decision. Grace visited weekly, bringing food and news and her infectious laughter. Samuel checked on their health regularly, though there was only so much medicine could do against the natural aging process. Elizabeth came by daily, often with her children and grandchildren in tow. In the summer of 1925, Zachary fell ill. It was nothing dramatic, just a slow decline, his body finally giving out after 78 years. He spent his last weeks in the bed he had shared with Victoria for over 4 decades, surrounded by family. Victoria sat with him every moment, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of all their years together. The children took turns keeping vigil, but Victoria never left his side. "I am not afraid," Zachary told her one evening, his voice weak but clear. "I have had the most incredible life. I have been loved beyond measure. I have no regrets." "Neither do I," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "Except that I have to let you go." "You will never have to let me go," Zachary insisted. "I will be with you always. In every sunset, in every meal you cook, in every grandchild's laugh, I will be there." He died peacefully 2 days later with Victoria's hand in his and his family all around him. His last words were, "I love you, Victoria. Thank you for saving me." Victoria felt like her heart had been torn from her chest, but even through the grief, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for the 43 years they had been given, for the love they had shared, for the family they had created. Zachary had been her miracle, and she had been his, and nothing could ever diminish that. The funeral was attended by nearly the entire town, a testament to the man Zachary had been. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains he had loved. Victoria stood by his grave for a long time after everyone else had left, talking to him, telling him about her plans to keep going, to honor his memory by living fully. The months after his death were the hardest of Victoria's life. She had never been alone like this, not since that July day in 1882. The house felt empty without him, even though it was still full of family. At night, she reached for him instinctively, only to find cold sheets where he should have been. But she persevered, because that was what they had always done. She cooked for her family, told stories to her great-grandchildren, tended her garden. She kept Zachary's memory alive in every action, in every word. One evening, sitting alone on the porch watching the sunset, she felt his presence so strongly it took her breath away. She could almost feel his arm around her shoulders, hear his voice whispering that he loved her. "I love you too," she said aloud, not caring if anyone heard. "I will always love you." Victoria lived for 2 more years, years filled with family and memories and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. She never remarried, never even considered it. Zachary had been her one true love, and that was enough. In the fall of 1927, at the age of 75, Victoria passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, as if she had been dreaming of something wonderful. They buried her beside Zachary on the hill, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription. Together in life, together in eternity. The ranch continued in the family, passed down through the generations. Thomas's son ran it for many years, and then his son after that. The house Victoria and Zachary had built remained the heart of the property, lovingly maintained and cherished by each new generation. The story of how Victoria and Zachary had met became family legend, told and retold to each new child born into the family. It was a story of compassion and love, of second chances and the power of kindness. It reminded them all of where they had come from, of the values that defined them. On summer evenings, when the family gathered at the ranch for reunions and celebrations, someone would inevitably point to the porch, and tell the story of how their great-great-grandparents used to sit there every evening, holding hands, watching the sunset. How Zachary had stumbled into independence half dead, and how Victoria had saved him with her cooking and her care. How they had fallen in love and built this entire family, this entire legacy. The children would listen with wide eyes, already understanding that this story was important, that it defined who they were. They learned about compassion, about taking care of those in need, about the transformative power of love. Years became decades, decades became a century, but the story lived on. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to what Victoria and Zachary had built together. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold, it was easy to imagine them still there on the porch, holding hands, loving each other across the boundaries of time and space. Their love story had begun with 3 months of starvation and a bowl of broth. It had grown into 43 years of marriage, 4 children, dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a legacy that would endure for generations. Victoria had cooked for Zachary and watched the color return to his face, but he had given her just as much in return. He had given her love, partnership, family, and a life rich with meaning in the end. That was what mattered. Not the hardships they had faced or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. They had found each other when both were lost, and together they had built something beautiful that would outlast them both. Their story was over, but their legacy lived on, in the ranch that still stood, in the family that still gathered there, in the values that still guided each new generation. Victoria and Zachary Xander had loved deeply and lived fully, and that was the greatest accomplishment of all. The sun set behind the mountains one more time, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and somewhere, perhaps, 2 souls found each other again, just as they had on that July day so long ago. Together in life, together in eternity, just as the inscription promised. Their love story was complete, a perfect circle that began with hunger and compassion and ended with a legacy that would never die.